Today's tutorial is about plagiarism. Each institution has its policy for consequences of plagiarism as well as academic honesty statements. In addition to that, I wanted to add to my syllabus as well as to make sure that all students understand exactly what plagiarism is and what the consequences are. I want to start with a couple of quick cautionary tales. One comes from a fellow colleague who had a student who submitted work, and the work was all fine, and so she received a nice high grade in the course. It was an online course, and as it turned out, the student had somebody submit all of the work for her. A few months later, after graduating, she received a job interview, and during that job interview, she was asked to go into a room and write a sample letter and to write a sample report. And in those submissions, it was discovered that she could not write so much as a sentence, had no idea about paragraph construction, and so forth. That caused the application location to contact the institution that granted her the degree, and that caused them to look into all of her records, and on it went. So that's just something that I had heard from a friend of mine. I wanted to pass that along. The second one is something that happened to a person that I actually know. And that student had gone from community college level to a accredited university and submitted a paper in his senior year at the university. And forgot to document sources and actually turned in a rough draft. And those major institutions have an entire legal department just for plagiarism, and they red flagged it, and he said, "Oh gosh, no, I didn't mean to. I didn't know it was a rough draft, and it was an oversight." They did not care, and it cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars in courses that he had to repeat and fines. So those are just a couple of little things to kind of get your attention as we move on forward. The definition of plagiarism is formally described here, but let me tell you in informal terms. And I have this in the course and other places. Me, don't know anything. I know my experience, and that's it. So if I write a paper and I say this is the theory for a calculus problem, how did I get that? I wasn't born knowing that. I didn't come into the world going, you know what, I believe I know about calculus. No, I don't know anything. I have to have documentation to show where I found that information. If I'm writing a paper about bias, I need to know what bias is. How did I know that? Well, I wasn't born knowing what bias is. I had to study that. And I need to show the source where that originated. And that needs to be a vetted source. Not Wikipedia, not Yahoo Answers, not anything like that, but from a vetted, reliable source. There are some examples of plagiarism that are shown here, and that you can take a look at in your own time, because I want to hit the high points here. There is direct plagiarism, and that is where somebody takes something from a website, copies, pastes it, and calls it their own. That is clearly plagiarism. The next is mosaic or structure. That's where somebody takes a quotation, copies it, pastes it, and then tries to change it up a little bit. Maybe misspell a word, maybe change the sentence structure up a little bit. Doesn't matter. It's still plagiarism. And next is self-plagiarism. How can I plagiarize myself, you say? Well, it's easy. You take an essay, you submit it to one class, and then you turn around and submit it to another class. It's going to show up on every originality report known to man as copied. It shows up on my originality side as 100% plagiarism, because you used the same paper in two different places. Next is accidental, and we talked about that with the young man that I know. It does not matter. The excuse, oh gosh, I didn't know, doesn't matter. If that was an acceptable excuse, then institutions would crumble. So keep that in mind. Authorship. Some people write papers for money. Now, this is something that did happen with one of my students many years ago. The student hired somebody to write a paper. Well, the person he hired to write the paper didn't do a very good job. So I'm reading the paper, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, my student is so much smarter than this. And so I look into it, and an originality report comes up, and it has that little $sign symbol that they show. And I followed that little breadcrumb trail, and I found out where that student purchased the paper, which was a complete and total waste of money because my student was smarter than the person that wrote the paper. And the paper wasn't even close to in the style that my student writes. So that was a real problem. Make sure that you don't do that. People that are hiring out to write papers, I don't know. The importance of avoiding plagiarism, this goes in there, and I just want to say, in addition to the material that's written here, an institution, you can understand this, cannot afford to award diplomas and degree programs to students who cheat. They can't. If they did, they would lose their accreditation, and they would lose all credibility in the education community. So you can understand why it's such a big deal. Now I want to point out a couple of other things, and this is a little thing you can read about plagiarism in literature and in pop culture. They use the example of Milli Vanilli. Some of you may not know who that is, but it's interesting to just look over those and make sure you understand them. They're in the syllabus, so make sure you go over that. Counterfeiting means copying somebody else's work, and that is plagiarism. Now, taking something that is somebody else's without taking it, that's to purloin something or to steal it, to take it dishonestly. And now the last two, and this is the end of it, original content. Some people, not very many, but some people will just turn in an essay that's just one quote after another. One quote cited, next quote cited, and that's the whole essay. That is a form of academic honesty problems, because the student isn't making any claims that they want to prove. There's no proof. There's no, this is what I'm researching to find the answer to. It's just a bunch of quotes. And it shows up on an originality report, shows up in numbers. It's going to show up as 45% or more quoted material. And that is academic dishonesty, and that results in a problem. The last, and I have seen this a time or two, is plagiarism in preparation. And that means that a student works on something and has somebody else type it up for them. And that's not honest. If students didn't take keyboarding in school, then good news, there are so many tutorials on YouTube to learn how to type on a keyboard. And having somebody else type work for a student is not a point of integrity. Now, when you write your essay, it needs to be typed by you and submitted by you. The only exceptions to that would be a letter from the disabilities department showing an inability to type, and that is something that would be considered. But the work needs to be created by you. In those examples where there's a text box entry, that also needs to be typed by the student and submitted. Not typed on a telephone, but typed on a keyboard. So keep that in mind and make sure that you do your own work. Again, these are details about plagiarism that I want to make sure that you clearly understand. So I'm going to go ahead and attach the PDF of these definitions for you to see, to make sure that you clearly understand and avoid any problems with plagiarism. That concludes this tutorial.